Employers of Reddit, what is the most disturbing thing you've discovered performing a background check on candidates? I interviewed a bunch of CSIS college seniors to become software development interns at a company I was a software development manager at. The plan was to hire interns for 20-ish hours a week, judge how good their skill was, and hire most all of them when they graduated, in about 4-5 months. I ended up hiring 8 interns, of which 5 or 6 we ended up converting to full-time after graduation. One guy I interviewed was older than the rest, about 26 when the rest were 21-23. He was super personable and did reasonably well on my development skills test. He sold himself really well and I was very enthusiastic about the interview and planned to offer him one of the positions. He pulled me aside after the interview and said he wanted to tell me something. It turns out he had spent 3 years in jail for dealing drugs. He further explained that he had been doing community service and court-mandated counseling for over 2 years and produced from his backpack a literal mountain of paperwork proving it. I told him I would consult HR. HR actually said they were fine with it. Still not sure how this happened. I brought the guy on and holy crap did he want to prove himself. He kicked all kinds of ass every moment he was there. While he wasn't the most skilled of the interns we brought on, he was probably third in talent. He spent every waking moment learning, listening and getting better as a developer. We converted him to employee the moment he graduated, and for the next year until the office closed down. Project ended. That dude probably averaged 80-hour weeks. He's now been working as a dev in a small startup for about 5 years. I still keep in touch. Great dude who just made a series of stupid mistakes when he was young. I was working at a family fun center as the accountant. I did all the payroll and was listed as the contact person with the state for any employee questions. I get a call that went something like this. Ted. Hi, my name is Ted and I'm calling to see if you employ Sally. Me yes. She just started here last week. I'm Sally's parole officer. I wanted to check and see if she will be dealing with any children at her work. Me yes. This is a family fun center that is full of kids. Is there a problem? TA. You need to send her home right now. She is not allowed to work anywhere with kids. Did you do a background check on her? Me I'll check with HR but we normally do run a background check. I will contact her, but please send her home and do not let her return. Me okay. Thank you. End of convo. I do a quick Google search and pull up her police record. Turns out she and her boyfriend had a kid together but were both addicted to drugs. To get the baby to stop crying they would put a bag over the baby's head and make it pass out. One night they left it over the baby's head too long and it stopped breathing. She did a few years in jail and had just recently been paroled. I lost it on our HR person because I found out he had stopped submitting background checks to the company we used even though we were still paying them the monthly fee. I hope by lost it on the HR guy you mean had his ass fired for not doing a critical part of his job. Guy had a felony assault charge. Not disturbing in itself but found out later it was from beating his previous boss face in after being confronted about coming in late to work repeatedly. The boss survived but apparently had to have his face reconstructed. So yeah, hard pass on that one. Hope you told him nope over the phone. I did a background check for one guy, and I found out that he had lied about every single job that he had. Going one job back, he claimed that he was a manager at a shoe store that went out of business. I was unable to verify that, because the shoe store went out of business. Then he said that he was in the military for 4 years as a communication specialist. I found that he was in the army for 3 months, but got an honorable discharge because he couldn't make it through boot camp. He claimed before that he was the manager of the evening shift at a chicken plant. Turns out that he was a janitor for only a few months before he was fired for job performance. He claimed he was a manager of a hotel before that, and it turned out that his mother was actually the night manager, and she was fired because she kept bringing her kid to work. I tried to do the math, and I realized that if everything in the background check was true, that the applicant probably also lied about his age, and had to be a lot younger than he claimed to be. He said he was in his late 20s, but I bet he was no older than 20 or 21. He figured out how to be entry level with 10 years of experience. Guy applied for a driver position with one of our senior care affiliates. Take elderly people on errands and to appointments, deliver meals, take clients to the center where they can hang out, etc. Not 1, not 2, but 10 counts of elder abuse, with a side of attempted murder and theft. Rescinded that offer real dang quick. I called an applicant's reference and his former employer said, "I'm not allowed to comment on former employee performance. I can only confirm their start and end dates." "But why don't you ask me about the weather?" I said. "Okay, how is the weather there?" He replied, "The clouds are moving lazily across the sky and they are really dumb." I found out later that he stole this from a Dilbert cartoon, but he really did say it. Man applying for a job as a construction estimator. He owned a construction company and was convicted of defrauding various city and county governments. Pretty much the last person you'd want doing estimates. The next guy who applied was a registered sex offender. I was on a roll with that position. That he had been convicted of a sex offense. He still got the job as he came into the office with a 15-year-old police report and court transcript, which explained he had got drunk during his first week at uni and took his pants off to take a pee in a fountain and was found half naked by a lady the next morning asleep in the fountain. This was at a time that the police were being really hard on public nudity, and he did a stupid thing in the wrong place. I was part of a group interview for a director position. The guy was cool, definitely qualified and was breezing through the interview. Pretty funny too. I thought for sure he was in. We get to the end and HR is telling him about the process after if they were to offer him the position, and once they mention the background check he quickly responds that he wouldn't pass it. We all sit there in silence for a second and he calmly says that he was charged with 3 counts of felony armed robbery so likely wouldn't pass. Not as bad as some to these, but I run a lot of background checks at my job. It was a bit darkly humorous when we were filling a position at a rehab facility, only to have like 6 finalist candidates in a row screen out with recent drug charges. As weird as it is, addicts make the best counselors. Unfortunately they make god-awful role models for the counselees. So Maryland. He had a charge for catching undersized crabs. Minimum was 5 inches across the shell at the time. That mother sucker. Fellow Marylander here. I am appalled. When we were hiring contractors I would Google their names and phone numbers to see what I could find on them. One of the guys that applied was recently in jail for a few years for endangering the welfare of a child. The article stated that the police showed up at the home of him and his girlfriend to serve a warrant. Upon entering the home they saw that the entire place was swimming with raw sewage. There were dirty needles scattered everywhere. When they checked the back bedroom they found 2 naked toddlers on moldy mattress that were surrounded by raw sewage. It made me physically ill to read. Needless to say, we did not hire him. Used to work in banking. Every employee was background checked, state and federal, and had their credit bureau reports run as well. We were never allowed to bring anyone on until all of their background checks had been approved, and that always took a minimum of 3 business days, sometimes as long as a week. One of the branches I was responsible for at the time broke the rule and hired a new teller and allowed him to start right away. They were extremely understaffed and had been for a while. He'd been there for a couple days. No problems. It was just after closing on a Friday when I got a call from HR. The new teller was a do not hire for felony. Crap. Out of curiosity, I asked what he was convicted of. Multiple rapes. I called the branch manager, the one who hired him, and she got very quiet and whispered to me that she broke the rules. Let him start working already. That he was there right now helping her close the branch and that they were the only 2 people there. Bear in mind, the manager was a very attractive, petite, like maybe 110 pound, woman in her late 20s. The teller, I later learned, was about the same age and built like a pro linebacker. She was terrified, so she stayed on the phone with me while I called corporate security on the other line. They got there very quickly, escorted her to her car and him out the door. No idea what happened to him, but I had to write her up and senior management was pissed. I hope she kept her job. That's the best reinforcement training for why company policies exist. I simply googled a candidate's name and the search returned US Marshals Fugitive of the Week. It was the same guy. My first job as a manager and I'm interviewing for a tech position. Had some good candidates. Then my boss says he has someone I should talk to. The guy was in his mid to late 50s, my age now. I was mid-20s then, and his sole tech experience was a 4-month tech class. He was singularly unqualified, but a nice guy. Then my boss says we're hiring him, and shuts down my questions with "I'm the boss, this is happening, make it work," which I do. The guy was a quick study, hard worker, and didn't seem to mind working for a youngling like me. After a year or so he and I are pulling an all-nighter and beasing about stuff, and he tells me his story. He had been a Mississippi riverboat pilot for decades, but in a barroom brawl had killed a guy with his bare hands. He'd served 15 years in prison, sobered up, and was looking for a job. I never had a problem with him, but it made our relationship feel exponentially more bizarre to me than it already was, since I was essentially already mentoring a guy 30 years my senior who turned out to be a barehanded, riverboat piloting killer. I wanna watch this movie. Matt Damon and Kevin Spacey teach each other life lessons while navigating the nuanced shenanigans of life and the tech industry. Maybe it's Donald Glover and Clint Eastwood. Maybe it's Daniel Radcliffe and John C. Reilly. Be right back. Writing awful screenplay. I was working at a pretty remote site up in northern Alberta and the RCMP showed up. Turns out one of the welders was one of the most wanted men in Canada, and was hiding up there for some ridiculous amount of time. He apparently murdered a gas station clerk in a botched robbery. This is why you should do background checks. I don't want to give too much details because this story is quite specific and potentially humiliating for the person we didn't hire. We interviewed a young guy for a position, and I did the basic check with his former employers once they were shortlisted for the final interviews. All came in fine except one, where they asked to have a phone conversation about the candidate. I got a call from them wherein they explained that he'd actually been fired for repeatedly posting photos to the company Instagram and Twitter which contained hidden items that weren't meant to be in there. I pushed and pushed to find out exactly what they meant. And it turns out this person we were interviewing to manage our social media had been posting photos with his genitals hidden in the photos for months before his bosses had noticed. It's like Where's Waldo? Only where's Willie? We had a guy include a shirtless flexing portrait on his resume. He was applying for an engineering position. We still have no idea what that was for. Probably showing you his body at work. Years ago, I was hiring for a large call center project. We were using a background check vendor which provided instant results. We did it on the spot when an offer was made so we could just go ahead and knock out the new hire paperwork. The result came back that the guy sitting in front of me was supposed to be sitting in jail at that moment. The punchline? It turned out that the guy sitting in front of me was not the real perp. His uncle had stolen his identity and had no ID on him when he was arrested. He was close enough in age to his nephew that he could pass just by giving the nephew's name, birth date, and SSN. Neither had been in the system before this. A fingerprint check eventually cleared things up. Keep in mind, this was about 10-11 years ago. It would be harder for this to happen today. It still happens. The one and only time I waived a background check prior because of a client request. The idiots that did the check later that week mixed him up with someone currently doing time in another state. So we fire him. He calls my cell phone and tells me they screwed up and it took him a 30-second Google search to figure it out. Was cleared up a couple days later. This cat is shocked that you haven't liked this video yet. Like it fast so they can calm down. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.